Hello, and welcome to the acclivity and how to excel in your career in the academy. I am Dr. Loren M. Hill, and I am here today with a special guest. And so let me just jump right in and introduce you to Dr. Michelle Cowin Gibbs. She is renowned in the area of theater and theater arts, and really, I would say she's an expert on one of my sheroes, and that would be Zora Neale Hurston. So today, in honor of, Women's History Month, and all that that stands for, I think really this is the perfect timing to be talking about Zora and what her life impact work was and all that she did, and why not have someone who's been inspired by Zora in many, many aspects of her life to the extent that she ultimately researched a great body of work. And we'll talk about how some of those threads of people who have come before us or are even in our lives now can have such a great influence on us. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Gibbs.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited for the opportunity and thank you so much for the invitation. Anytime I get to talk about, Zora Neale Hurston, anytime I get, if you let a researcher talk about their research, yeah, it's always like, yay, it's my birthday.
Yes, 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 absolutely. Don't I know that so
Like,
well?
like, give me a
And
song.
I,
We'll go on.
I'm so happy that we're connected, and I'm so happy to have you here talking about your work as inspired by her life's work. And, what we'll eventually get to today is how she can influence us and encourage us, right? Her, women like her, people like her. I mean, she was just amazing. I could go on and on gushing about her. And I'm sure we'll do some of that mutual admiration today during our talk, and hopefully our audience will be left with inspiration as well. So let's just jump right in and have you tell us about Miss Zora and why she came to be your shiro.
Yes, I love this word shiro. I'm loving this. I'm going to use this word in my with my students and actually because and also be considering it as well for my own way that I process Hurston. So
Mm,
I think of my work as the ability to engage in Hurstoning.
okay.
Theater, I'm in performance. I'm always thinking about the way that we are, yes, everyday lives processing and doing as an act of performance, as an act of engaging in a kind of performativity. For Black and Brown folks, certainly that is often racialized. And
Mm,
so it's been something that I've been thinking about for quite some time. Certainly, even I would even say before my PhD work, in my M.F.A program, I've been thinking about the process of performativity and performance and performing in everyday life. And so when I started researching Hurston, I suppose about 10 years ago now, I started thinking about her from the process of doing and
mm,
how she often activated spaces and activated spaces both in terms of her own sort of Zora-ness that she
yeah.
brought to just about every endeavor that she entered into was her Hurston-ness that she brought in. But then also the very act of doing the work that she did as a anthropologist, as an ethnographer, as a playwright, which is what I study. I study her work, her theater work, as a performer, as a teacher, a drama teacher,
Mhm,
as a reporter at some points that often her professional life and her personal life engaged in this act of doing. And I
mhm,
call it Hurstoning. She
mhm,
is Hurstoning. And part of Hurstoning is being able to bring the totality of your experience just about to any endeavor and add your the very act of doing adds your perspective to it. It almost comments on. So thinking about when Zora moves to leaves Bernard, goes into the field in southern communities, and as she's in the field, she's like, "Oh, I'm doing the work of cultural anthropology." But
Yes.
what I really need to be doing the work of is the folk work. And that's
Yeah.
connecting. That's using myself, my body, myself, my mind, my age, my background, my history with these people. I know these people. I need to bring my full self to this experience, even in my professional life. And so I call that act of Hurstoning is one of empowerment. And I even think about the ways that I Hurston, and maybe, I'll say the way I Michelle,
Mhm.
So, so I'm constantly, really intrigued by just her process in general. Yes, one as a playwright, but also as a person, and how the personal informs what the professional life for her became.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I think of it as a process of herstoning, and that's really exciting to me in terms of how we often navigate tough spaces.
Well,
And
I
so
love this term, Hurstoning, right? I jotted it down, right? So we're finding new terminology in our dialogue today, right? And this is something that I know our listeners enjoy as well, finding out new things. And so as we apply this concept of Hurstoning to our lives and the space of the academy, there are a couple of things that you said that I think we can really hone in on, right? We've probably done this ourselves and maybe not know that we're Hurstoning, right? And so being in these spaces, full stop, right there. That is Hurstoning. Then activating oneself in these spaces, right? How do you bring yourself, as you said, initially she went in as an anthropologist, right? So we're studying from afar, but then we find that, you know what? Actually, I got a little bit more going on here, right? And I can deepen the connection if I really just sit in the seat of what's going on, right? So we can connect to our research in that way, and thus what we are researching has deeper meaning, right? So talk a little bit more about those aspects for us.
yeah, so I often think that the ability to navigate difficult spaces, um, we often I will speak from personal experience. I have disconnected.
Mm.
So if I'm in especially now,
Mhm.
I've been
Mhm.
I've been on this I've been on this rat race and this rat race for a minute. Um, having now been this is my third appointment.
Mm.
Um, so I've been in it for a minute. Um, I think that I have disengaged in some respects sometimes.
Mhm. Mhm.
That it feels so personal. The feeling um of not being accepted, or at
Mm.
least feeling like there's some exclusion happening. So everyone gets it, and I don't quite get it. Or I teach something so new and different that I kind of end up on an island by myself, as opposed to everyone else in the space are often, sort of theater practitioners and performers and directors. And so they have like their own language. And I work in theater studies, and, and the work that I study is often dealing with Black and Brown folks. And it is not uncommon for there to be one or two of us in any given program, theater program. So it's just
Right.
how it is. Yeah, decolonized theater, theater and
Mhm.
higher ed. So, that's not a secret. So they can often feel very, very lonely.
Yes.
And so I will dis I have found these days I disengage. I just take myself out of the situation, or I disconnect in some way. And then I reconnect in other ways, so with
Mm-hmm.
family or with things that are more familiar with me, my research, the enclaves, the beautiful Black woman enclaves that I have built for myself,
Yeah.
in various other spaces, become sort of a safe haven for me. And if I think back to this notion of Hurstoning and being able to bring the full totality of your own experience to just about any situation, I think it certainly applies to those tough places of which folks disengage can
Mhm.
bring that sense of they bring that sense of awareness that I'm disengaging, um,
Mhm.
as part of that. And so um, even when I unplug from the institution and spend my time in personal spaces that are familiar to me, I'm Hurstoning. I'm
Yes.
I find that Hurston's experience and the research that I've done has been, I don't know if she would publicly say it's a lonely experience.
Mm.
Um, I will say, reading letters of her work, and even some of her writing, it's now published. Herod the Great is now published, but before Herod the Great was published, some of the writings that she was sort of musing about as she was writing this book, express a kind of a loneliness, a
Yeah.
detachment. I'll call it a detachment because again, I don't think Zora would appreciate me saying lonely.
Well, you know what? Here's what I would offer, right? As because I've read about, Zora, I've read about Alan, right, the new Negro. What I and a number of the contemporaries then and people that we kind of reflect on now, and as a psychologist, behavioral health professional, I am okay with naming emotions, right? Now, I do, I looked at her life and what she was married like 5 times and or something like that. She, lived all over the place. She was certainly a Renaissance woman, right? And I think that some people um find themselves, and it's okay, it's a human experience to feel lonely, and then there's also the experience of being alone, right? So I think that, and I'll take it, she might be mad at me, but
Yeah.
as would probably some others. But I was reading something recently, and it really resonated with me because I thought so often, those of us who have had to be strong and present this stoic, like I'm okay, we're not. And we don't, we for good reason, we don't express that. But there are places and safe spaces where we should be able to. And I think for those of us who are in the academy, and those of us who are hyper visible, right? We have to protect ourselves and protect our peace, but there should be somewhere, and I'd like to think that Zora had this amongst her, friends, colleagues, something that she could go back and just go like, oh, today was a day. Or, this 6 months has been crazy. So, so I just think that it's okay for us to, now that we have language around what particular emotions are, uh, that we kind of, oh, say it's okay. I don't think she was depressed, right? I think there were times where she might have been sad, tired, worn out, but I also think that she just soared to such heights, that we definitely have to give her respect. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that Zora spent, so we're just gonna name it, I think she spent a lot of time alone. Um, I think that forming relationships was really difficult for her.
Mhm.
even among Black women.
Sure.
Um, she writes, there's a, really great, I believe it's in her autobiography. She talks about being a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated.
Yes.
I am a proud Zeta, proud
And you
sorority.
were inspired to do that because of
I
her. You shared that
Yes,
with,
I was. I
I want the
was. At
audience
first
to
was
know
like,
that.
I did. I did. I wanted to be part of a Black woman enclave, like, and I was looking around and I'm like, Zora was a Zeta. I said, any
Mhm,
organization that's good enough for Zora is good enough for me. So
mhm.
I'm a proud Zeta. But I remember she wrote one of her chapters about her experience being a Zeta. And one of the things she said is, well, the Zetas are very smart. They're very, very smart. Um,
Yes.
but one of the things she also sort of reflects too is that, even in this, community of other Black women who are brilliant, like she is, she's still feeling a little detached, some
Sure.
detachment there. And in all of her professional, I would say certainly maybe some folks would argue, but I think in all of her professional relationships and settings, she finds a way in some way or a situation happens where there's some distancing. And her
Sure.
her, friendship with Langston Hughes,
Right.
crumbled.
Right.
Um, some of her, sort of other friends that she has sort of step back away from that. And you see her constantly building new relationships, building new
Mhm.
communities at which to express, to collaborate. She was a beautiful collaborator in terms of sort of like sparking ideas and interest, some of which don't completely, get realized, but the ideas, she's beautiful at generating ideas with others. And I think we definitely see that in her work. Um, but she did spend a lot of time sort of moved away and detached. And I do think that promotes some loneliness and some
Yeah.
isolation. And I think it reflects in some of the writing in Herod the Great. It definitely reflects some of that sense of loneliness in the middle of the narrative. This is Deborah Plant has now written a piece or has helped edit a piece, Herod the Great for her. But in the original text of Herod the Great, she spends like portions of this piece talking about her own life and her own
Right.
experiences, which often include pain, physical
Yes.
pain, I would
Right.
even argue to say some mental pain, some
Yes.
sadness there. And so that's part, and it gets blended with the creative art, with the creative art. And so that, to me, that process of Hurstoning is important and it's valid. And that even in the creative act of her professional life and her work, and some of the detachment that she feels in there, she's using that. She's using it as an energy, almost as a life force, to move through and to push through certain situations. And so when I often feel quite detached, I don't look at it anymore as a sense of weakness or that I am, somehow giving up. You know,
Right.
I see it all as an act of beautiful herstoning, that I'm caring for myself in the ways that I need to care for myself. And when I'm cared for and loved on, um,
Mhm.
I am better able, equipped to come back into what I feel like are sometimes tough spaces and tough conversations to be part of. So to me, it's all a beautiful process of herstoning that is meaningful and worthwhile. And I'm learning something about myself every single day that I feel like Hurston is also reflected in Hurston's work as well, and some of her personal writings and letters and the beautiful creative work that she put out into the world.
So I really, really am loving this conversation, and I'm loving that we have invited her into this space, and I hope she's somewhere smiling on us as well, because we're talking about Zora, but we're also talking about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Many of us in this in the academy. And I will even say some of these other industries that we're all in, right? We're the only ones. And I'll be so bold as to say, we are the innovators. We are the ones who are generating new ideas, and we are ahead of our time, right? And I'm saying it boldly. And I will say it again. So when you are that person or those people, particularly women, and you have some melanin in your skin, no matter how much or how little, it can be so overwhelming, right? Because there have been days, and maybe you felt like this, or maybe some of our listeners have, where you're like, am I speaking English right now? Right? Am I human? Am I on a planet? Do people, what's wrong with y'all? I know I said that very clearly, and you are looking at me like I'm from another planet. And that can be exhausting. And so when you are an innovator and you are coming up with all of these creative ideas, whatever your discipline is in the academy, and you're constantly met with pushback, rejection, whether that's an article, whether it's a book review, whether it's a grant, whether it's a promotion, you name it, right? I think no matter where you are, from a student to the president of a university, if you are a woman of color, you're going to be met with these things, right? So, what I think, have in common with Zora is not just the loneliness and aloneness, but this constant striving to connect to others, right? To connect, to go into these spaces and be like, hi, I'm Loren, who are you? And sometimes we're welcome, sometimes we're rejected. There's a continuum of what can happen in these spaces, yet we still move forward. So, for our listeners, I'm hoping that you all are encouraged by this life story and our stories that we're sharing, because each day that you show up in these spaces and you offer yourself, and also, or you come to know when to sort of pull back, as Dr. Gibbs says, disconnect from this space, but reconnect to this space, right? How do you manage? How do you balance? How do you remain sane, while you're going about the business of your mission and your purpose in this life?
Oh wow, that is really beautiful. Yeah, no, that's hey, it be like that sometimes.
Right?
It
Right.
be like that sometimes. Uh, yeah, and I'd say for Zora, she experienced a lot of strife in um, it's interesting. I'll say it this way. Zora was really, really good at saving face,
Mm,
um, navigating different social situations, some of which involved race, some of which involved gender. And she offered I would say, a very nuanced perspective on adversity,
mm-hmm,
one in which that acknowledges really messed up situations
mm,
and really biased spaces, um, and the ability for some to attempt to sort of knock down or push aside marginalized folks and marginalized bodies. I'm thinking about the work of in the Harlem, some of the work that came out of the Harlem Renaissance and her
yes.
perspective about Black folks, that often was in opposition to how it is that other writers of the period were interpreting Black experiences during that
Mm-hmm,
time, and
mm,
how she was interpreting that through this very Black folk, Southern Black folk lens.
right.
Uh, and how that perspective often got her into some
Trouble.
disagreement, yeah, and some trouble and
Yes.
some disagreements, that is, sort of really problematic for her.
Right.
Um, but I'm also intrigued by the way that she's like, I'm not going to sit back and allow my work to be disrespected or be misinterpreted in this way.
Yes.
So in some of her essays that she's writing about, she's acknowledging racism, she's acknowledging
Mhm.
marginalization, both as a woman, both as a black woman. So these intersecting oppressions that she's acknowledging in several of her essays and her writings, and I would even go so far as to say even in her literature, In Their Eyes Were Watching God, we're definitely seeing this
Mhm.
running commentary on what it means to be a Black woman in the moment,
Right.
how to constantly be living in the moment, and how does
Yeah.
one maintain that. And so I feel like, she's acknowledging that both among Black folks of the period.
Hmm.
And then she's also kind of acknowledging that to white folks as well. But in this,
Mm.
again, it's very nuanced perspective. So, I know that a lot of the work that she wants to do, that she's thinking about, I want to do, needs money and needs funding. And, white women are funding a lot of the work that comes out of the Harlem Renaissance. And she had a very famous, influential funder,
Right.
um, who did a lot of her work, funded a lot of her work. And so there's kind of this negotiating of the process of herstoning in these different communities and in these different lights. And one of which is like acknowledging oppression, acknowledging racism among white people. And then she's talking about, okay, well, how do I respond to that? How do I think about that? Do I let white folks define me? No, I define myself. I define myself in these situations. And so I feel like at each of these sort of points with these different audiences, both white audiences, Black and brown audiences, she's constantly finding a way to carve a path that it
Hmm.
doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be either or, but that there can be a way forward that includes her own mind, her own thinking, her own feelings about situations. She doesn't in some way have to align herself with, but that there
Right.
can be a beautiful process. And even through the struggle, because she struggled, even in these sort of very intellectual perspectives or these perspectives on race and gender, she's struggling through that in terms of defining herself. But in the process of doing that, she's also learning something about herself. And so to be able to navigate trouble, to be able to navigate adversity, because she experienced a lot of adversity in these spaces, that in that process of doing that, she's learning about herself and she's finding the joy in self-acceptance.
Right.
So even
I
though it's difficult, she's finding some kind of sense of self-acceptance in that. So
I love that. And many things come to mind, but something that I also think is this process of self-discovery, which can lead to self-acceptance. As we think about Zora and some of her contemporaries, and even how we can parallel that with our life now, is that, life is full of controversy, right? How do we navigate these spaces of the academy? How do we navigate the spaces of our lives? How do we think about intersectionality as we've come to know this term now? And it's not always easy. And it is, there are many processes that sort of go along with it. But if we look at something that Zora did well, and she did many things well, obviously, she reinvented herself. She, set about making sure that she had the credentials to show up in different places and spaces. She was well read, well informed, could go out and roll up her sleeves or go be fully dressed to the nines, as they would say, and engage in different experiences. And I think that, as we conclude our conversation today and think about her and think about ourselves and think about Women History Month and how all of this goes together, is we can be encouraged. Some of what we're doing may be acknowledged in this while we're here, but then I look at how many things were saved, her works that were essentially being burned in the front yard until somebody came by and was like, wait, don't do that. Let me, sort of stamping out the burning papers and recovering them. And things being published well after she's gone, or this sort of, rediscovering of her. And so I think that as we move through these spaces, and we're just here for a time in the academy, and it feels like forever, right? Especially when we're going through these rough times. We, I think, should be encouraged to know that what we're doing matters, right? What we're doing matters. So, as we finish up our conversation today, Dr. Gibbs, what's one thing that you can leave with our audience from Zora that we can take with us to help us as we continue to navigate the sharp edges and corners of the academy?
So good. Oh, there's so many things to take from Zora. So many things to take from her.
Yeah.
Um, I would say that I'll say personally, the one thing that I take from her is recognizing that resilience can come in so many different for so many different ways and so many different communities, kind of like what we talked about earlier. And that my ability to state my purpose, state my beliefs, state my values, live my values, um, find myself in my work, find myself with my family. Um, the process that I engage in my own Hurstoning work is not one of, um, it's not one that makes me iffy or weak or um, disengaged or feeling completely isolated away. It's not one of a disservice that I do for myself, but that it is one of a process of learning about me, and that Hurston spent her life learning about herself and reflecting on herself. I mean, we know this based on her body of work and her body of literature, or her body of work that talks about her being just a really great listener. And we see that in the work that the process of listening is activated. I mean, if you look at some of her film work that she does, she's also a filmmaker too. Huh.
Yes.
She's doing things. She is in the background. There's a church scene. She's in the background and she's playing, she's playing on the drums or the tambourine. She's got the tambourine. There's a moment where she's in one of the videos where they're at a worship service. There's several worship services, and she's not just behind the camera, right? She's not behind the camera. She's with the people. She's
Mm.
among the people. And she is always getting up and she's always going. And she is doing that in a very activated, very present way. And so I remind myself that the process of doing my work, the way I Hurston, is one of constantly learning about myself and not being afraid of that, not being afraid, thinking that it makes me weak or that I'm indecisive or that for whatever struggles that I'm going through, but that to live one's life authentically, which is what I felt like Zora did very well, was to live her life authentically, hey, for good or for worse, to live an authentic life is to live a life with purpose, to live a life of compassion, to live a life of fullness. And there's no weakness in there. There should be no feeling of sort of second guessing oneself, but that we live and we experience out forward. Um, and so that's what I take away from her work in that way. It's that I'm Hurstoning, yo. Like this is, and let me tell you something. These days, I'm really Hurstoning. I'm
Well,
really
I love
Hurstoning.
that.
But
I love.
it feels good. It feels good. The process of learning about oneself and engaging that as an active process of doing, the act of doing, um, investing, that kind of investment is really important. It is how we stay connected, even when do need to disengage. It is
Yeah.
how we stay connected to ourselves, and to the communities that we call home and that we care about.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gibbs. This has been an amazing discussion, and we will be taking away the Hurstoning and thinking about all that she did in her life and how we can do just some of that in our lives. And I appreciate her connectedness. I appreciate her example. And I hope that you who are listening, also found some things to take away with you in honor of this Women's History Month 2025. And thank you again for being a active part of our audience. And I look forward to having an engagement with you again soon. So thank you for listening. And this is Dr. Loren M. Hill, your academic career advancement coach. And thank you again, Dr. Gibbs.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.